circulates. If we were to put something that we could trace into your system, so you ate something that didn't fully digest, and we run across this all the time, and a day, 2 days later, or whatever it is, you go to the bathroom and you can see part of that item that's not fully digested, we would see that something had flowed through you. And it doesn't seem necessarily that it started at one point and came back to its origin point as if it circulated. But the movement would be that it was flowing and it ran its course. And so a lot of times, when we're talking about flow, it's the movement within circulation that is that flow. When we get into yoga, the flow oftentimes is referring to how things circulate through their system. And for our body system, a lot of times we need things to actually have to run full circle. They have a beginning and a middle and an end, and that looks different in different areas of the body. If we were to talk about lymphatic fluid or oxygen or food substances or even proteins may run a much longer circulatory course. They might not get back exactly to point A, circulating from point A to point A rather than flowing from point A to point B. But this circulation, as it moves all the way through you, it's our circulation for now. So if something is something that you ingest, its circulation is hopefully that different particles don't actually get absorbed fully, and we turn those into excrement, and other particles of the food turn into proteins or fats, or maybe they're more water or stuff like that, and those run their full course through the body. How they do that between different points might depict on how healthy we would consider this. Now, in the body, for flow and circulation, we typically think of things that have a very short period of circulation or flow. So we don't oftentimes think about bone as flowing or circulating. But we do know that somebody, as they get older, can decrease their bone mineral density. It might get lower. And what we find in that is that there's definitely a circulation of bone minerals that are being used up and leave the body. They leave the body mass. And sometimes they shift in positions, and sometimes they just completely leave. Now, whether this is exactly accurate or not, I'm not positive for sure, but I've read that all of your cells, including the bone stuff, living cells, living matter, will be replaced every 7 years or so in a healthy person. So we'll say that the bone circulation has a complete flow from its beginning to its end. We might say that that's flow. And bone circulation flow complete in, we'll just say 7 years. Yeah, so that's pretty slow. We'll go respiratory. Sorry if I spell any of this wrong. Respiratory, so like your breath, we'll just go for one inspiration, pause, expiration, and pause, not necessarily measuring how long it takes an oxygen molecule to go all the way through, but we'll say one respiratory cycle, and there's some more specific technical terms for that. We'll say maybe that's 7 to 20 seconds. And so we'll say that your respiratory circulatory rate, how fast things turn over, is very different than how fast the bone circulation or turnover from when it comes in and leaves is very, very different. Now in yoga, for the body, one of the major things that we're going to be looking for is healthy circulation or flow between the different points. And a healthy circulation is going to move materials along the way fast enough that they never accumulate or get too slow, because slow circulation, or hypocirculation, is going to be kind of like lethargy, and when materials go too slow in their movement in the body, they can build up and they can become toxic. The opposite would be hyper, and in that circulation, the nutrients of whatever is circulating or flowing through the body might not have the chance to be absorbed, and if it's flowing too much, it could actually place a strain on that which is flowing through. Hypo, or too slow, can actually accumulate, and that can put stress on whatever is circulating through as well. So too much or too little can become toxic. And that toxic relationship, we could say, is related to flow and circulation. So let's say that you had some bone mass, and it just wasn't breaking down and leaving your body as much. Or it was building up too fast. We might actually see a bone shift. You might see a mineral deposit that's out of the norm and not healthy. And if it was circulating out too fast, faster than it was coming back in and building up, it was hyper leaving, hypo coming in relationship, we might see that the bone mineral density was getting less, and we might see a weakness in the bones. And we can talk about that in respiratory or respiration as well, that somebody who breathes quite rapidly when they're resting, so they're having the hyper respiratory flow of breath and the circulation of their breath and its circulatory pattern, that this person might actually be called hypertense. So we can look at this in a lot of different ways. Hypotense, we don't typically consider that to be an issue because so many people seem overly tense, but you can actually be hypotense as well. Too low of a resting heart rate, not enough breathing going on. So yoga is going to be this work that we're going to do, and especially in Hatha yoga, we're going to try to work on flow and circulation. And we're going to do it in all sorts of different ways, because we're going to try to bring harmony to the flow and circulation. And it's really a very basic concept. This flow and circulation, we can look at it in very short terms for the respiratory rate. So if we get a person to move in the correct manner, or even visualize something, or repeat a mantra, or do whatever it is, we have all sorts of different techniques for it, but we might be able to change their respiratory rate. Maybe they'll take a longer, slower, deeper breath, and the cycles between each breath maybe get extended, and maybe this goes up to like 30 seconds per sequence of breath. The flow and the circulation has changed in its tempo, and this person might go from being kind of hypertense or hypertense, they might actually get into a more harmonious state. And when we might also take somebody, and let's say this is in their lymph, and I don't really have a rate. I don't know how to give you a measurement for that, but the lymphatic system is kind of the waste removal system in your body. And when this has very poor circulation, whatever is toxic and building up in this waste removal system isn't getting out very fast. And so the system is holding on to toxic junk too long, and it's possible that that causes some distress to the system, or illness, depends on the language that we're using. If we hold it long enough and it's too distressful, it can be considered an illness or sickness. So some movement for yoga is purported to release stress, something that might be constricted in the circulatory system of the lymph, to help it open up, and at the same time create a pumping action with the rest of the body and the different movements that we do, and try to get that junk processed out. And sometimes we can do the whole thing, actually, supposedly we can do the whole thing all at once if we're very creative and technically sound, and we keep in our mind what we're trying to do. We can create better circulation amongst all of the body's systems. And in the yoga conversation, this harmony no guarantee that one affects the other in an exact, precise way, but the harmony that we create in the body has a harmonious effect on the mind. It's not necessarily going to cure a mind issue, and likewise, just purely thinking about something may not completely fix something in the body, but the way that we circulate through our body, if we can do it with just the right in-between hyper and hypo, and we actually have some really neat Sanskrit terms for this stuff over here, those of you who have been to some of the other classes, or gone to some other workshop stuff. If we get it just right in the middle, there's very little stress, at least between the two parts, which would put the other portion at ease. Now, we've talked mostly about the Hatha Yoga and the body work in this. A lot of this work is done by breathing, by posture, by sequence, and by timing, and by the alignment in those postures. But we can also work from the mind towards the body. We don't always have to start at the body and go towards the mind. And we can attempt to start it both at the same time. We can do it in just about any different direction that you would like. This would be much more of a meditative, contemplative type regime of work. And this is going to be, well, I don't want to say it's going to be like fitness or exercise. I think it's much deeper than that. But this is definitely going to go not as much of the contemplative to start with. For me, personally, I don't think you can ever totally separate those. So in order to do the body well, your mind needs to be engaged. And in order to engage your mind well, the body needs to be addressed. So our whole work here can be described for this portion as creating great flow and circulation. And what this concept is going to be talking about is any degree, any layer of the body. Oftentimes we call it living tissue in the body because some tissues aren't always called living, but most of the tissues in the body haven't been able to fix a cavity by getting new tooth material flow in. So I might not consider that the living tissue, but for almost all of the other major tissues in the body, how can we get it to circulate better so that the incoming tissues that are replacing it, replenishing it, bones, the muscles, the connective tissue, a different little topic, but it fits in there. And how do we get that which is going out to be appropriately replenished with something coming in? And then the very cool part of it, how do we get that which is circulating inward? Not just flowing from point A to point B, but how do we get the circulation to have a positive replenishing? And by this, I mean that if you do have something within your whole system that challenges your system, so maybe you have a clot, maybe you have a tight muscle. A tight muscle would be a hypertense muscle. Maybe you have your bone mineral density developing awkwardly in your bones because you hold your body in a position that the bones are trying to not fix it, but accommodate it. So how do we have positive replenishing? And for right now, the positive replenishing is that which is flowing into our circulatory system actually has a more harmonious effect. It's not just the flow that has it, but it's what it does to the compartment or the component. Does the way that this is all circulating and flowing, is it going to take a muscle or an area of connective tissue and release some of the tension? Is it going to take another circulatory system in the body and maybe increase the way that the lymphatic system is circulating so it doesn't hold? So in this circulation there is a constancy of change, and is the constancy of change positive? And that's our big work. This is why yoga is oftentimes considered a path, because it is constant, and is the change that you're having, it is replenishing, it's replacing the old, it's letting go of the old, but is that new form that it's taking on every moment, is it more positive? Don't worry about perfection, but is it more positive? Is it harmonious or more harmonious? Yeah. And this is what we're going to build on for a while, so keep this in mind.